We're up and running, recording. So, Doug, you know what to do whenever you're ready. Go ahead and take it away.
Krishna Raj Raja, welcome to the Insight Jam.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, this is a pleasure because a lot of what we talk about in the Insight Jam podcast is how AI systems are going to affect technology implementations in general, but obviously society in a broader sense. But before we get to that latter point, let's talk a little bit about the opportunity for SupportLogic. You're founder, CEO, and it really is a generative AI, predictive machine learning story. Tell us a little bit about what the opportunity is for SupportLogic.
Yeah, so the company was founded 6, 7, 8, actually, let me make sure I've got the dates right, around 8 years ago. So it's quite a while back. Back in those days, AI was not a main story in any tech news journal, any tech news media. Now it's mainstream. It's even in mainstream television channels, right? That was definitely not the case 8 years ago. The company's vision was founded with the idea that every customer interaction has valuable signals. And if you can harness those signals, act on those signals, you can make transformative changes to your business. And if you don't, you're going to have big impact in business. That was a fundamental hypothesis of the company. And this came from my personal experience being a frontline support engineer for a company called VMware when they were very, very small. And what I noticed when I was a support engineer is that even when customers are calling you in the context of a technical issue, and we're dealing with customers, the customers are giving you lots of signals about how your product works, what does not work, what product features should exist in the product that does not exist today, what new market opportunities that exist for the company to build, what sales opportunity that currently exists with your current customers, is there a churn risk with your customer? All of this is there in your interaction with your customer. But support engineers are simply focused on solving technical issues. They're not trained to spot the signals. And even if they spot the signals, they don't have any workflows for the signals. They get dropped on the floor. So I felt like there's a huge missed opportunity. Customers are constantly telling you what they want, what risk you have in your business. And if you don't hear from them, what else you're building in your organization. So that's what led to SupportLogic. The foundation of SupportLogic is we analyze every post-sales customer interactions. We extract signals from those interactions. We maintain context of the signals across conversational boundaries, across customer boundaries. We predict what might happen with a particular account. We give you trends that we are seeing across all your customer interactions. We predict customer escalations. We predict who is the right subject matter expert in the company who can resolve a customer issue. We do a whole lot of stuff just from observing your customer interactions and giving you insights and workflows for it. So that's what SupportLogic does. This is not just an idea, pie in the sky idea. This is used in production systems for large enterprise companies, and we're making significant impact for those companies. So that's kind of the brief of SupportLogic and why it was founded.
And so I'm curious about how your technology has evolved. Has it changed as some of the generative AI technologies have emerged? I mean, you've been at this now for 8 years. What was kind of the original technology thinking, and has that been impacted by the emergence of generative AI?
So for a lot of folks who are in the space, who are in the AI space, ChatGPT, there's LLMs, they're not a big surprise for us. I mean, the mainstream media caught up to it. It was not a big surprise. I think the trend was very, very clear. In fact, this is why I saw the promise of AI 8 years ago, right? Even 8 years ago, AI was able to do some amazing stuff that I didn't realize that the rest of the world has caught up to it, right? So finally we caught up to it. So it's an evolution. It's not a revolution, right? From my perspective. What has changed is, I think one fundamental shift that has changed in the industry is there was a long-held belief in the industry that more data does not mean better results. It's all about the quality of data, not the quantity of data. That is the long-held belief in machine learning systems. Because we threw a lot of data, and a lot of data only creates more noise, didn't produce better results. I think what large language models has fundamentally changed is they basically broke this belief that more data is not better data, it's quality data is better data. They actually proved, no, if you put more data, eventually it gets better. The model performance eventually gets better. I think that's the big revelation in the last few years, I would say.
That ultimately more data does provide better outputs.
Correct. And that is why it's called large language models, right? It's really like large amount of data. The models eventually figures out the patterns. If you have medium-sized data, the performance, it depends on the quality of data, not the quantity of the data. With a large amount of data, the patterns emerges automatically. I think there is even a chart that shows model performance is kind of flat and degrades after a point in time, and then it takes off at one point in time. I think that's the big revelation in the last couple of years. But the capabilities of what machine learning can do is foundationally has not changed in the 8 years. We had predictive capabilities 8 years ago. We had sentence completion capabilities 8 years ago. We had grammar capabilities, summarization capabilities. All of those were there before. But I think people are assuming that all of that means more quality data, not quantity data. I think with these big tech companies, whether it's OpenAI or AWS or Microsoft, they proved that with a lot of compute, a lot of data, you can brute force this and you can build a model. I think that's the big revelation.
Well, and that's clearly one of the changes is obviously the processing power of GPUs and now the ability to process massive amounts more data than 8 years ago. And I think even some of the terminology has changed. I mean, I do think we were referring to it 8 years ago, as I recall, as machine learning. It was less about artificial intelligence. I think people were using AI a little bit in the vernacular, but it was mostly this idea of machine learning, and it was more simple in terms of being able to understand it. And I'm curious about that, the idea of being able to capture these trains of thought or the outputs that go into the analysis that you do. You say data, the quality of the data matters. How do you get the data to be consistently quality from, I'm assuming it's human input from customer interactions?
So this is the problem for enterprises. I think this is where even today, even with the advent of large language models, if you want to do something in the predictive AI space, you need high quality data. Data cleansing and data pre-processing is a huge part of our success story. And that's what we've realized. So just to give us a context, we do sentiment analysis. One of the stuff that we do is, as part of the signals that we're extracting from post-sales customer interaction, is let's understand the sentiment of the customer. And when we say sentiment, we're not just talking about negative and positive sentiments. We're talking about frustration, confusion, impatience, profanity. What is really driving that sentiment, right? What are the urgency or all of that? Expectation.
And how is that captured?
How it's captured is like, it's all buried in our language structure. So English language is quite tricky, right? You could be sarcastic. You could actually negate the meaning of a sentence with just one word in the end, right? So you can't do keyword-based approach. Keyword-based approach absolutely does not work. You really have to understand sentence structures, language structures, and then you have to do it. Now, that's the easy part. The sentiment analysis is the easy part. There were machine learning models built even 8 years ago to do sentiment analysis. That was not rocket science. In fact, I naively assumed when I started SupportLogic that sentiment analysis is a solved problem. So let me use a public AI models. Back in those days was AWS and Google and Microsoft and HPE. All of them had AI models. And naively assumed I would use it and I would just call it a day. I would focus on building the application, not the technology. To my disappointment, it didn't work. And it did not work because B2B customer interactions are complex. B2B customer interactions has a lot of politeness. You're communicating by email. Email has its own nuances. For example, you could say good morning. You can say thank you, best regards, yours truly. You have a signature block, and you have headers and footers. And if you have an email thread going back and forth, then the same sentence is repeated multiple times, right? And then we were in the B2B technical support space. In technical communications, people put technical language interleave with human language. You can say blue screen of death, system crashed, right? All of this really impacts your sentiment analysis. So the vanilla sentiment models did not work. We realized we had to do a lot of data pre-processing to clean the data and focus on the kernel of the message that has a sentiment buried in it. So that's kind of an example of how data cleaning is still very, very relevant for extracting true signal from the noise.
So there's interactions happening. You're trying to understand the signals within these interactions. Is this a prompting process that is presented to a rep that might be engaged in this interaction, or is this pure reading and interpretation from a system that is translating or transcribing, I should say, and then processing independently?
So I think there's a lot of hype around generative AI, and it's almost like people think when people think about AI, they're only thinking about generative AI. That's the only AI that exists. Generative AI, by definition, generates something, right? It's not predicting. Well, it predicts the next sequence that you're going to type, but it's really not predicting an outcome. It is not signal extraction. So what we do with using AI is signal extraction, which requires no generative AI. We're basically looking at sentence structures, we're looking at language patterns and see what signals can we extract from it. And so prompting is not the technique that we use for this. We use LLMs, but we don't use prompting.
No, I guess I was saying more on the that you're trying to get whoever the human was involved in this in the interaction, that you're prompting them to assess that interaction as a human, right? Independent of
right.
What the signal can be extracted from language processing. You're also confirming, I'm assuming you're confirming with the human what they believe the sentiment to be. Is that what's happening as well, or no? Or is it purely machine-based?
It's purely machine-based. So we don't need confirmation from... And so the thing is, the quite easy thing is the sentiments is universally, when you look at a sentiment, you know what the sentiment is, right? So...
Well, but to your point, though, I mean, do you? I mean, when you're interacting with a customer service rep, for instance, and you are using maybe sarcasm, the transcription of that will be, to your point, harder to interpret than if you just asked the rep,
right.
Where were they when you were talking to them? I mean, I'm assuming the rep had a pretty good sense of what that customer was feeling, regardless of the words.
Right. The rep would have a sense. So here's a nuance there. When I was a support engineer, I dealt with only unhappy customers because I was dealing with escalations every day. So for me, talking to unhappy customers is part and parcel of support. So when I actually started SupportLogic, this is an inside story of SupportLogic. Sentiment analysis was not even on our radar because we thought sentiment analysis is useless. We thought that, hey, what's the big deal? Every customer who's calling support is upset. So what's the point in saying the obvious thing about sentiment?
To start with that assumption that they're
right.
Already.
And this is where even when you have a subject matter expertise, sometimes it can create blind spots for you. What I did not realize is, as a support engineer, as an escalation engineer, it's an obvious thing for me. But for the rest of the company, it's not an obvious thing. For people who are monitoring support, it's not an obvious thing. For people who want to understand the pulse, maintain the pulse of the customer, and not all accounts are same. For support engineer, every account is the same. But for the company, it's not the same. So sentiment of one customer versus another customer is different. So there is a lot of value to be had in observing sentiment. And as a passive observer, was looking at all your interactions and then sending the signals to the right people within the company, whether it's customer success, whether it's account manager, whether it's product manager, whether it's your CEO who wants to monitor what's happening with an account. A lot of value to be had there. So that's when we realized, okay, this technology is not just for support engineers, it's actually for the entire company. Now, support engineers also benefit from it. And the reason is you have a recency bias when you're doing support. You tend to focus on the loudest customer, the most unhappiest customer, and often prioritization gets mixed up. You don't really focus on, you're only looking at what's in front of you. You don't know what happened with this account 6 months ago or 3 months ago, or maybe this account has opened a ticket and talking to a different rep in a different call center, and they're very unhappy there. Having all of that context when you're dealing with a customer helps you to prioritize the right cases. And that in turn makes a huge impact in how you service your customers, even for the frontline support engineers, because nobody has the full picture of what's happening. So in a system that observing and giving the full picture and maintaining context of it and nudges you and be an angel on your shoulder and tells you, hey, you do this, this is a nuance you're missing, makes better support engineers. And when you have better support engineers, you have better support experience. And when you have better support experience, everything changes for the company.
So how do you tie it together so that the signals that you are unearthing and presenting to others within the organization, how do you tie it together? Is it moving through a CRM system? Are you integrating with the existing ERP systems? How do you tie it all together?
So architecturally, we are very, very similar to what I would say like a SIM system in security world. Conceptually, it's also very, very similar. So what that means is, if you want to understand whether you have security attacks in your infrastructure, you have to monitor all your endpoints, you have to monitor all your infrastructure, right? And then you're looking for patterns of attack surface. If something looks suspicious, you give an early warning because it's too late. If the security breach happens, it's too late. You want to catch it before it happens. And then you have a collaboration platforms where DevSecOps can come in and actually swarm and collaborate an issue and solve it. We do the same thing for your customer interactions. So we can monitor all your customer interaction endpoints. What are your customer interaction endpoints? You're doing support. That information is captured in your support CRM, whether it's Zendesk or Salesforce or whatever, Jira or whatever it is, right? Then you have a telephony system. You're talking to a telephony system. That could be your voice transcriptions. You could have a chat system. Now, this interaction could be done by a human agent or it could be done by a virtual agent, like a chatbot. It doesn't matter. You're still interacting with customers. So we plug into all of those systems. We take the interaction data, and then we run through a machine learning process. We extract signals, we maintain context, we make predictions, and then when we spot something is not going well, we give a swarming capability. When we swarm, we give you the full interaction stream, and we tell you where exactly the interaction went wrong. Highlight the exact interaction points where it went wrong, and you can swarm and you can act on it internally, right? So that's the architecture of a product. Very, very similar to DevSecOps products out there.
Well, and then how is that realized with regard to impacting the customer? Is that so? This like an internal swarm like that would then yield some sort of strategic approach back to the customer that would allow to either retain them or reduce churn or potentially upsell or cross sell some other opportunities.
All of it. I mean, you're catching early morning. You're catching before it's too late. What is too late? When the CEO gets a call from the customer saying, I'm just churning. That's too late. If a customer escalated the issue, it's already too late, right? So today we only rely on one thing, surveys. You send a survey to the customer or the customer churns. That's equivalent in the infrastructure world. That's equivalent to saying, I would only react to a situation after a server outage. Imagine, would you hire a CIO today who says that I will only react after a server outage? Or would you hire a CISO who says I only react after a security incident? But we are hiring cheap customer offices and making them to act in a very reactive fashion. So this basically allows you to catch issues very, very early. And then when you act on it and you turn the situation around, in fact, your CSAT score goes up. So you're not looking at CSAT and NPS score as a reactive way of what's happening. You can actually change the outcome of CSAT and NPS score because you're catching those issues very, very early on.
So is this ultimately implemented in an agentic way through automated bot implementations? I mean, how do you? So you can extract the signal, you can devise a corrective path or some upsell, cross-sell messaging. How is it ultimately then delivered, and how is it delivered in the timely manner that you're suggesting is required?
So let me give a very specific example. So we can predict which customer will escalate an issue before the customer actually escalates an issue. And escalations are
and so obviously you're doing that out of other signals than when they finally call customer service, because if you're predicting it before you're saying you can predict it before they actually call customer service or before they're already in kind of churn mode.
Now the customer is already in communication with you, but the customer's sentiment is getting progressively worse, and
through the messaging in the communications through email analysis,
email messaging, chat messaging, telephonic conversations, not just what is actively open right now, but also we have historical context of what else has customers done with you in the past. That historical context was what's happening right now. We can predict, okay, this account is going to explode because they're not receiving the support they need from you. And therefore, this account is at risk. That's an early warning we can provide just from observing these conversations. That early warning from a support context is useful. From a support engineer context, it's prioritization. From a customer success manager perspective, it's useful to prevent an account churn. From an account manager perspective, it's the same. From an exec perspective, it's the same, right? So that's what we can give early warning.
So is this in the final analysis best delivered through human interaction? Back to in terms of customer.
Right. So when we make a prediction, we also give recommendation on what you need to do to diffuse the situation. So it's not just something that's going to explode and it's going to explode. What's the point if you're showing them the inevitable?
And so is there a best practice there with regard to human-to-human communication versus chat bot to human interaction? And do you get feedback with regard to how customers respond to that? I'm very curious about this particular moment in time, and we'll get into that a little bit. But is there kind of a measurable difference between how a customer reacts if it's human to human versus chatbot to human, or vice versa?
Absolutely. And this is one of the use cases of using SupportLogic, because they want to monitor if you're putting a new system in place. Are customers getting more frustrated with chatbot, or are they getting more frustrated with a human being? Right? That's something they want to understand the patterns and trends. Now you can observe and understand the patterns and trends. But even within human beings, you're going to look at, okay, is my support team an offshore is performing better than an onshore team? Or is my outsourced support is performing better than an onshore support team, right? So you can look at all those comparisons. We also look at outgoing messages. It's not just incoming messages. So we also observe what does the support engineer is telling the customer. Are they being assertive? Do they have language skills? Are they using the right tonality? Are they being polite to the customers? So we also observe that, and we identify soft skill gaps in the customer interactions.
Well, so let's talk about that for a second, because it is my belief that you will eventually be able to not worry about that. That those frail humans that can't always be polite because they might be having a bad day, are a failure point in an organization, and at a certain size organization, or just will become eventually. My supposition with regard to generative AI and AI in general is that they won't be able to compete with a properly fully developed and mature chat technology, that the customer won't even be able to tell the difference. and you will never have to worry about it using the right language or the right tonality or the right cultural references based upon everything that it knows. What do you think about that? That humans ultimately will not be the best implementation delivery system for that messaging at a certain customer service level?
I think it remains to be seen. I think we're still playing very early innings of this game. We don't know how this is going to...
No, I understand, and I'm not saying it happens right now, but you are wearing a Stanford t-shirt or shirt underneath that jacket. You've seen a thing or two. You tell me what you think. I mean, we're early on in the game. I mean, I know you're further along than most of us, but I've seen enough revolutions to know that this isn't where it ends. This is just the beginning.
So generally, this is my personal take on technology in general. Human beings have an evolutionary brain shaped by millions of years of evolution. If you look at technology that has succeeded in the industry, these are technology that has mapped very, very close to our evolutionary part of our brain. For example, our evolutionary part of the brain seeks connection, seeks sharing information, right? That's evolutionary part of our brain. We share information when we were a tribe, and that's what allowed us to become a better species compared to other species. So if you look at technology like Facebook, technology like Instagram, they actually feed into that primal brain, wanting to share, wanting to connect, right? Only those technologies have excelled. Technology that isolates you generally doesn't stick for too long. If you take VR as an example, all these experiences, people with the common feedback you hear is it's very isolating. It doesn't speak to our evolutionary brain, right? So there is some part to chatbot interactions and others. We are programmed to find uncanny valley, right? So we can spot things which are not quite right? So I think that's a part is unknown for me, like how this is going to work out, even though chatbots are becoming really, really good in emulating human behavior. I think we shouldn't underestimate humans' ability to spot the difference, right? So that's something to remain to be seen. Now, even if you take that chatbot is perfect and it's interacting with customers perfectly, you still need to observe the human side of that interaction. Yes, your human is talking to a chatbot, you still need to observe the human side of the interaction. What is the customer telling you? You also need to observe the performance of the chatbot. It's not guaranteed it's going to be 100% accurate. You need to monitor the hallucinations. You need to monitor whether it's breaking down in certain situations, catch exceptions. One thing we are really, really good at, human beings, and this is where I'm not a big fan of the word artificial intelligence, because for me, intelligence means being able to handle exceptions. Machines are really bad in handling exceptions. No AI system can handle exceptions. Only human beings can handle exceptions. Almost all AI systems are predictive systems, which means they'll give you the most likely possibility. They can only handle known situation, not unknown situations, net new situations. And this is where there's always a last mile problem in a lot of the AI technology. So even with generative AI is just predictor, just text predictor.
But isn't that just basically an escalation issue? I mean,
right.
That ultimately what you're dealing with at the front line of the customer interaction is the kind of lowest level of customer support, until such time as they can't handle. Again, I come back to the fact that humans will not be able to compete at a certain level with a highly trained chatbot. And to your point around, Facebook and people seeking interaction, they are trained to do that face to face. But since the advent of the internet and interactive digital social media, the human brain hasn't evolved. It's only been a couple of decades since we've been doing this way digitally.
Right.
And we haven't been able to evolve our brain to the point where we can delineate between what we're hearing as human interaction that we would have gotten across a fire in a cave over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to this last 20, where it appears we're getting that our brain isn't able to process that this isn't the same. That's a digital human on the other side, and they're using digital technology to communicate with me. My primitive brain still sees it as, no, that's the person across the fire that I have been interacting with for hundreds of thousands of years. So it can't recognize it in the end if it's highly sophisticated, which it will be in no time, flat, based upon where we're headed with large language models and neural networks.
Right. I think the key point I would say is, irrespective of whether the technology gets closer to human behavior or not, the fundamental need for human connection doesn't change. I mean, there are chatbots. This is where I kind of fall off the wagon on this, and I'm not a big fan, but of the idea. But the human brain won't be able to tell the difference. It will get what it wants in its limbic system, or whatever that system is, all the way back it'll get its primitive brain satisfied with this presentation layer that we've now accepted, this digital presentation layer, and the behavior and the sound and the intonation and the lip syncing will be so good that you won't be able to tell. Your brain won't shoot off any more warning signals. It'll just accept it as that's it. That's a human over there. No doubt about it. I mean, if you look at the insect species, this has happened, right? There are insects who I think is an Australian insect or something. They actually go over the green bottles or the beer bottles because they think they are naturally attracted to that beer bottles. Because they're programmed to do it. And I think we will go into the same state. There is already evidences of people getting addicted to chatbots or falling in love with chatbots. Like the movie that came sometime back, that's already happening.
Yeah.
So all of that is true. I'm not discounting any of that. That the machine's capability to emulate human behavior as closely as possible, that we fall into that. There is no doubt.
I would say that's an exciting opportunity. I mean, and I would assume that that's inevitably where your customers are going to want you to be is ultimately delivering hundreds of thousands of highly tuned digital assistants who are dealing with customers at a level that customers have never received before and are happy about it, because it's functioning very, very well.
Yeah, end of the day, it's all about automation and handling scale, right? To handle thousands of customer interactions, it's definitely more efficient to put a chatbot in place or some autonomous system in place than letting human beings interact. And human beings can get involved when there are exceptions, because you still need someone to handle the exceptions. No different than a factory which is manufacturing cars using robots. You still need manual intervention, but you can do it at a much better scale, much better precision, much better accuracy, but you still need to do quality control, even in those processes, right? You still need to have human handling exceptions in those processes. I think the scale is going to differ. The other thing I would say is, like, in the past, right, we've been very, very hesitant to call customer support because it's a painful experience to call customer support. You have to be on the line, some human being have to explain yourself
wait times, all that.
Over and over. So we were avoiding having interaction with businesses.
Yep.
One of the expectation is that people initially thought we were going to put chatbot to reduce the volume of interactions, and they're seeing the opposite effect. They're putting chatbot that are more interaction because it's more easier to engage with the business, which is in the end is a good thing for the business, because you want to understand the voice of the customer. Previously, the voice of the customer was not heard because customer never interacted with you, because you made it very difficult for them to interact with you. You make it easier to interact with them. Now you will have a lot more feedback coming in from customers, and you need to extract more of those signals from those interactions. So I think that trend is going to go up, that the interaction volume is going to go up as we make it more and more easier to interact with businesses.
So how does the system work, practically speaking, on an organization by organization level? when it isn't basically a large language model, it's more of a small language model. These are our customer interactions. This is our customer feedback points. This is what we're hearing, but it isn't the, trillions of computations that are happening in a large language model with a generative AI system. I mean, do you begin to marry the two where you're layering generative AI into this more compressed, very specific customer language collection of interactions? I mean, how do you keep the two away from one another? Or how do you and the other thing, I guess, is you wouldn't want all your customer interactions pouring into a large language model. How do you keep it all segregated?
Yeah, let me give you an example. So if you look at human intelligence, our intelligence has two components to it. One is the collective brain of the entire human society. What is the collective portion of the entire human society? We're not reinventing wheel. We know how fire is already made. Our ancestors already figured out how fire is made. We don't need to understand how car works. Somebody has already figured it out, right? So we're not starting from scratch. We have all this contextual intelligence that someone has already built it, right? We're banking on it. And then you have domain-specific or contextual intelligence on what's happening in your life on a day-to-day basis, right? So think of that, what's happening in your life on a day-to-day basis is your SLM. The collective society of the knowledge that has built is the LLM, right? So you have to marry them both. So what we do in our technology is we look at what's your data, private data that you have, what's the LLM overall has generated. Like we have all the language patterns for a million different ways sentiments are expressed, right? We take your data and then we compare it with what's there and then we produce insights. I think this is the general trend right now. You have to marry your private data, your small language, your contextual data with the general intelligence that we have. And that's a trend. Even Apple's recent announcement is also the iOS 18 they've announced. It's the same thing. Apple Intelligence is all about your private data. And then they call ChatGPT if they want to understand the public domain knowledge, right? So that's the model we have, and that's what we've been doing. So I think there's a misconception that people think, oh, I have a small amount of data, I'm not going to benefit from AI. Absolutely wrong.
How do you begin to layer in the cultural differences in terms of not only the language, but the sentiment, the politeness or the direction or the orientation of the conversation? I mean, how do you start to think about things globally and how that needs to be subtly different with regard to customer interactions from country to country and region to region?
Yeah, I mean, even before going into geographical differences, there is actually even domain differences, and also there is channel differences. So what do I mean by domain differences and channel differences? The way we express signals in a chat conversation is very different from how we express it in email, and it's very different how we talk live in a call. So even signal extraction is channel specific. You can't take a model that works in one channel and slap it across all channels. It's very different, right? And then there is domain difference. Domain difference is B2B signals are different from B2C signals. And within B2B, the signals expressed in a technical conversation is different from non-technical conversations. So there's a lot of nuances like that, right? So first you have to factor that in. Then you take the geographical differences or cultural differences. The cultural differences are not that significant as we think it is. It's very interesting. Human behavior is pretty much the same. The choice of words and the typos and the grammatical issues are the only things you need to factor in, but more or less, the language patterns are more or less the same. And also there's personality differences. Some people are very open with their feedback, very vocal about it, and some people are not, right? So it's not just cultural, there's also personality elements also comes into play. So the personality elements, why I'm calling this out is when we're assessing the health of an account, a customer account, we are looking at this broad spectrum of feedback we receive from every person in the company that you interacted with, not just one person. Maybe there's one unhappy customer, one unhappy reporter in our organization does not mean the account is unhealthy.
So let's talk a little bit about how you decided to take this on in the first place. I'm always curious about how people end up where they end up, and the decisions that you made along the way. What got you into technology in the first place?
So it's actually quite an accident. My passion was actually biology and genetic engineering. That's what I wanted to do. And this was 1996. Dolly just came out, I believe. Genetic cloning, the first genetic cloning. I was absolutely fascinated by genetic engineering. I thought that's the future.
The cloned sheep? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
The sheep.
Yeah.
So I thought that's what I wanted to do. And then computers was a complete accident. Took a course in the summer break for computers, and I absolutely loved the technology, and I was more drawn to computer gaming than anything else. And then somebody told me this game was written in this specific language, and I was, how could this be written in a language? And I was trying to learn the language, and I realized this language allows me to do very basic stuff. How do they build a very complex game like this? So that got my curiosity and got into computers. So time progressed. I actually studied chemical engineering. I was not officially, don't have a degree in computer science. Then I started assembling computers for my friends and family and for myself. And one thing when you do assemble computers is things break all the time.
I used to do the same thing, and it always blew my mind that the thing wouldn't fire up. All the pieces were there, the software was in there, and it just would not light up.
Yeah, same thing. So I assembled computers. It would install Windows, DOS, Linux, all different operating systems. And every time things doesn't break, it got my curiosity, and I was trying to fix the issue. So I became very, very energized by problem solving when things didn't work. On the flip side, the family and friends that I was servicing with computers, they were upset. And they were like, I just want this damn computer to work because I want to talk to my son. I want to video chat with my son somewhere else. Like, I got the intersection of humanity and technology, and how technology fails gloriously in front of humanity. That's when I realized that technologies were not designed with humanity in mind. We were, instead of technology adapting to the limitations of human beings were adapting to the limitations of technology. And I thought this is fundamentally broken. Technology should be servicing to our limitations. Instead, we were trying to understand all the limitations of interacting with computers, right? So I felt like this is something the industry, finally that revolution is happening right now. Right now, the technology is adapting to human limitations, right? So that's what got me into this. Subconsciously, I didn't even realize I was a support person, but I realized I was doing support for my friends and families when I was assembling computers because I was a go-to IT guy when something broke. Then I got drafted into this company called VMware. They were very, very small. They were 80 people company. They were looking for Linux talent in India, and I was one of the few folks who had Linux talent at the time. They reached out to me, offered me a job, and I said, I want to be an operating system engineer. What do you mean I have to be a support engineer? Took the job because the technology was fascinating, and I ended up really, really liking it. And I think often people don't understand how rewarding support job is, especially when you're doing technical support. I'm not sure about frontline support, maybe that rewarding. Technical support, when you're dealing with complex issues, every issue that you're solving, that's an instant reward because you see the outcome of the customer. Customer is very happy. They will be very thankful to you. It's an adrenaline rush. Yeah. So that's kind of the journey for me.
Well, and so as you've been building your business, I'm curious about what you think about developing culture and what you look for with regard to characteristics within employees that can basically build out the culture on top of all the other folks that you've hired. And what do you look at and think about with regard to company culture?
I think one thing I've learned, I think this was a phrase somebody told me and it stuck with me. Culture is basically what you can tolerate. That's what becomes the company culture. And I
expand on that, please.
So often what we tend to do is we don't take a firm stance on certain things, and we let it slide, we let it go, and we're tolerant to things. When you become tolerant to things, then you don't have a culture. Culture basically defines as you reward the right things, and you're intolerant to things that you doesn't align with what you believe in. That's what becomes the culture of the company. So this, once I recognized that I just changed, the only way to shape a culture is be absolutely saying, this is absolutely no, we cannot do this. This is not us, right? This is not the company. This is not the tradition we want to have in this company. On the flip side, when they do the right thing, you recognize it and reward it. And reward doesn't mean monetary reward or anything, like just recognizing and calling it out, saying you did the right thing. This behavior is commendable. That's what shapes the culture. And for a startup, invariably, the DNA of the founder becomes the company's culture in one way or the other. It permeates because you're making all these microcosm of decisions: who to hire, who not to hire, what to reward, what to emphasize, what not to emphasize. That eventually shapes the culture of the company. So I realized that I need to focus on my inner self if I need to shape my company's culture. What is important to me? What is not important to me? What are the cultural values that I want to uphold? That's what eventually becomes company's cultural values, invariably.
Now, is SupportLogic, I'm sure like every company these days post-pandemic, there's some hybrid approach to employee in-office participation. How do you manage that in terms of getting the culture? So prior to the pandemic, there was a great deal of cultural, sharing from just being around one another, obviously, and that has gone away pretty significantly. How do you manage around that?
So even before pandemic, we're distributed from day one of the company, geographically distributed from day one. So for us, the pandemic was not a big transition at all. So managing culture in a distributed environment, it's all about, again, you have a channel of communication. For most companies, it's Slack. It's a channel of communications. So what you say or don't say in those channels, what you recognize and what you dismiss, that's important. Company all hands are super important. Re-emphasizing, repeating the message is super important. Often when people hear it for the first time, they sort of get it. Second time, third time, fourth time, they internalize it. And then, of course, you have new people coming in, so you have to constantly refresh it. It's not a one message. It's not like you write it on a wall and a piece of paper and it's done. It needs to be repeated over and over and over. And in different forms and different stories. That's when it gets ingrained into the company's DNA. And founder plays an enormous role in ingraining the culture in the company, repeating it. It should not be delegated to, in my opinion, to an HR function. It should come from the founder and the CEO.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I appreciate the all-in comment, because it is now, one could argue, easier to communicate, and because you can have an all-in call with basically an all-company call, unlike the old days where there wasn't a room typically big enough or everybody wasn't around enough, and it was done via whatever, starfish phone on a conference room table. It's so much more easy to have those conversations regularly, and I think you're right, delivering those messages matters. I'm curious about younger people. I know you probably have internships and you're constantly recruiting new folks into the organization. I have a couple of kids who are now up and out. I have another daughter who's just getting into college, but I wonder about what they're going to experience over the next 20 or 30 years with regard to this moment in time and all that's going to happen with regard to AI. What would you suggest or any advice you would offer to a young person beginning a career in enterprise technology? I mean, is there places where you think they should, if they want to rise to the level that you've risen, are there any places that you would think they would be best suited? I mean, I know you mentioned support and customer interactions, certainly a very valuable, learning experience. Any other kind of places that you thought, if I'm glad I did those things and put myself in those positions to get that value?
The first few jobs that I did is foundational. And I would say pick a job not for salary, not for the glamour. Pick a job that really helps you to learn. The first few jobs. I took peanut salary for my first job, but was a tremendous learning ground. I had other opportunities. I could have taken a different job, much better salary, but I would have not learned this much. So I think that's important. I think there is a phrase, I think Jerry Seinfeld said recently, which resonated with me. Do what you think is cool. What do you personally think is cool? Don't worry about what the society thinks. Don't worry about what your parents think or your friends think. Just focus on what's cool. Because if you do something that you think is cool, means you have a genuine interest in it. You're drawn to it and you will excel in it eventually. So that kind of my generic advice I would give. And that's very difficult to do because it's something sometimes you have to buck the trend and do something that others have not done. For me, in my case, my small case, I took support role. My friends were saying, why are you doing support? Krishna, you're an engineer. You should be an operating system engineer. But I ended up really, really liking it. And I thought it was cool to doing it. I didn't care about what my friends and family thought about it. I think that to me, makes a big difference in the long run.
Oh, I think it's harder than ever with all the social media pressure and this, kind of image creation that's required now of younger people to present themselves in their best possible way to have that maturity to say, no, this is a long-term game and I'm investing in a different set of inputs than what my friend group or my family would expect me to where they'd expect me to be. One of the best things I ever did. So I was had a very advanced early career in politics, actually, before I got into technology. And during college and right out of college, I was successful as a political consultant and a campaign manager. But I got to a point around the age of 25 where I just wasn't happy doing that. And I became a bartender because I needed customer service. I needed interaction at a different level. I knew I did. I was not as good as I probably could have been in interpersonal skills. I knew I needed to just shake some of that off and grow in a way that was very unconventional, and not a lot of people that I knew thought it was my best career move to leave a highly successful political career and go into nightclub bartending. But I walked out of that so much better off from having those interpersonal skills.
Yeah, that's foundational to political career.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and also when you see an opportunity, and I think you probably saw an opportunity when you see technology beginning to change, and that's another thing that I noticed when the internet landed and I was still in politics, and I recognized that, I needed to be out of politics and into technology. That was in the 90s. When you see things like this, like right now, this moment in time, we are at the precipice of, I would argue, a technology revolution we've never even seen, and we've seen some dandies. It's important to get into the mix if you think that's where you would like to end up. And I'm curious, when you decided, I mean, you must have come of age with computer games, as you were saying, in the 90s, was it?
Correct, yeah.
And when the browsers started landing, I'm sure you were...
Netscape just came out in the market. I'm talking about DOS era, right? It's not even graphic user interface.
Yeah.
My first gaming experience was PC DOS.
Right.
Right.
A lot of keyboard work.
Right. So graphic user interface itself was fascinating. Windows 3.1 was fascinating. Windows 95 was fascinating. And evolution of gaming, I still follow gaming industry. It's my personal passion. And how much it has evolved in the last 25, 30 years, how realistic the games have become. It's all fascinating journey from small single pixel games to the 3D world and immersive world that we can live in right now.
There's a school of thought that says that games going forward, based upon generative AI and similar artificial intelligence technologies, that games will begin to spool out in real time if compute can kind of get to that level, and everybody's game experience will be. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'm curious what you.
Yeah.
You say that.
NVIDIA's doing this for quite some time, right? I mean, they have this feature for to reduce the load on the GPUs. It'll generate imagery and fill in grass patches or whatever automatically on the screen. So they've been doing this for quite some time. Both AMD and NVIDIA has done this. So I think that's absolutely makes sense. And also character development. There is a lot of technologies being built. Non-playable characters in the gaming world, for instance, can have their own backstory and they can have their own dialogue sequence from generative AI. Because that takes a lot of effort in manually creating it. So you can have a little bit more immersive world where you can interact with every character in the gaming world because they all will be auto-generated from generative AI. So I think that's definitely is happening already. This is not science fiction. It's already happening. There are startups which are doing some cool stuff in the space. Personally know a couple of them doing cool stuff in the space. So it's all happening. I think if you look at gaming technology, it gives you a very good view into the future, like where we're heading as an industry in general.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's driven as much of the advancements in certainly in graphical processing than almost anything else. I mean, the demand for more and more realistic graphics in computer games has definitely driven NVIDIA. I don't doubt for a moment that NVIDIA wouldn't be anywhere they are today if it wasn't for the need for better graphics in games. I think that was probably there.
And Bitcoin, and I think a string of really good applications. They had a lot of killer applications, one after the other. Now Gen AI, but yeah.
Yeah, well, we should have another conversation. I know we're going to wrap things up now, but we should have another conversation because I'm not even sure the killer apps have arrived yet in the AI. I think in
not
AI.
in the AI. I'm saying for NVIDIA's rise in the last 20 years
Oh, yeah.
was gaming and then Bitcoin and now Gen AI. And I know they're scratching the surface on Gen AI, and also GPU computing as generally is going to go up. So yeah, this is why the stock market is treating them as they're treating them right now.
Well, it also the way they're treating Intel right now is an interesting byproduct of not recognizing when technology is changing. Intel allowed their massively dominant processing position to become vulnerable by not recognizing.
Right. This is why tying it all back together, listening to the voice of the customer is super important in every customer interaction.
Intel could have used you.
Yes,
Outstanding. Well, thanks very much for the time today. This has been a great conversation, and best of luck with SupportLogic and everything you're doing in the next year.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for hosting me.
Want more Insight Jam? Follow us on Instagram for exclusive content like a daily dose of best practices and buying advice from industry experts and leading solution providers. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel for long-form highlights from our expert panel discussions. And if you prefer to listen, please rate and review the Insight Jam podcast on Apple, Spotify, or Google. The Solutions Review team is hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so don't miss out. Now, let's get back to the show.